So, yeah, apparently the Messianic mental midget went out and read some scholarly books and came up with a sound answer to my last vid. And then after that, he grew eagle's wings from his ears and flapped away into outer space, where he discovered a civilization consisting of living items of patio furniture who gave him a cure for cancer. No, none of that. But you can tell what actually happened by the flood of grammatically challenged fundy atheists who showed up here on my channel after he made his posting. It's pretty sad when so many electrons are wasted in the production of that kind of mess. The main argument that comes out of the pool of sewer waste he produced is an idiocy where he tells us the same stupid thing he told us last time. That is, they don't look that way. It's a point he repeats 500 different ways, even as it never gets any better. It just doesn't get through these fundy atheist skulls that what it looks like, or sounds like, or resembles to them, and to their ignorant, uneducated minds, is not a measure of anything except their own uneducated ignorance. As a result, we have this sort of racist and bigoted ignorance that follows. No, Messianic moron, there was nothing wrong with the Bible's communication skills. The problem is on your end, and with the fact that you fail miserably to understand the genre, method, and purpose of ancient law codes. Given all that, if the Messianic moron had any brains at all, he'd read works by credentialed scholars of the ancient Near East and make some effort to understand the text of another culture and time on their own terms. This slide he slapped together tells the story well enough of why he won't be picking up any serious literature on the subject anytime soon. He actually thinks his lack of being convinced should impress us, as if it's no more than further testimony to his own inability, stupidity, ignorance, and lack of intellectual curiosity. Well, I'll say it slowly again so he'll get it. Messianic moron, you are a YouTube loudmouth nobody with no credentials. You make vids that look like PowerPoints put together by a rabid squirrel. You have never written an article for a peer-reviewed journal. Your material has never been cited by scholars. You have never read any books on the subject by scholars. All you do is flip open the Bible and read, and then announce your idiotic sense impressions. No one is impressed by this except people who are as stupid as you are. Eventually the drool starts flying and we get this idiotic question, which I already answered. How can you tell? You do what scholars do. You study ancient law codes and how they were used. You study ancient language and how it was used. We know from repeated examples, from repeated experience, and from both ancient and modern cultural studies that this is how law codes were used, and this was how the language was used. This is the finding and consensus of multiple scholars. Sitting there behind your screen and burping, "How do you know?" isn't an answer. It's a sign that you don't have an answer and are gyrating helplessly in what the scholar N.T. Wright would call the folly of trying to fit the hurricane of 14th century BC legal, linguistic, and literary concepts into the bottle of late modern Western categories. It's no shock that instead of accepting his responsibility, he blames God for not being clear. Well, guess what? That alleged obligation on God is your own invention. It's not reasonable at all. You're just being a crybaby. The meaning of the text was perfectly obvious to the audience it was written to. It was also painfully obvious to generations thereafter who lived under the same supposition that law codes served a didactic purpose. And it doesn't take any real effort to gain the same understanding today. All you have to do is do a little reading in a book like Hiller's. Is that too much to ask? Maybe there's too many big words in that book for you? Maybe you're too busy watching TV, or plinking on that plastic piano of yours, or too busy whipping it out of your pants to be bothered to spend the necessary time to do study? Making matters worse, he doesn't even know what the fallacy of appeal to authority is. No, it's not a fallacy to refer to real experts. Hello, folks. Recently I had this exchange with one of our garden variety fundy atheists here, over on the vid Richard Dawkins Dies Again. It gives me occasion to remark upon a certain tactic of theirs, and here's how it usually goes. To start, we offer some fact or argument, and note that it was offered by a certain credentialed scholar in the field of the argument subject, as I did. The fundy atheist shoots back that we are committing a fallacious or illegitimate appeal to authority, and refuses to answer the argument, or like this guy, makes it out as though we're hiding behind the authority and not really providing an argument. Of course, this is clearly an evasion that is as much an admission that the fundy atheist can't answer the argument and needs a way out. But that's not the main problem. The main problem is that appeal to authority, as done here, isn't a fallacy, and it isn't illegitimate. Now first consider the implications if the fundy atheist is right. That means academic journal articles and books littered with supporting notes are nothing but long-winded fallacies. Expert witnesses in court settings should be dispensed with, because the use of them is illegitimate. Not even much of what we see on the nightly news programs should be believed, since we believe what they say based on the authority of the reporter as a witness, and as a supposedly intelligent human being with competent powers of observation and analysis. The reality is that the fallacy of appeal to authority does not apply to citations of genuine authorities. The main expression of this fallacy is when an irrelevant authority is cited, such as to prove some point on nuclear physics by quoting Michael Jordan. Here's one explanation from the NISCOR website, which collects information on logical fallacies. Of course, I'm not saying that there is no discernment involved when an authority is used. When we use an authority, they should be a credible authority who deserves attention. They should also not be biased to the point of distorting information and arguments, and their views should be solid enough to challenge or overcome opposing views. At such points, the burden is on the fundy atheist to meet the challenge, and just yelling argument from authority isn't meeting the challenge. I use the example of an expert witness. Use of scholarly sources is effectively a testimony by an expert witness in the court, though in this case, the court of reader opinion. Under such circumstances, the critic needs to call their own witness if they can't answer the point made. It would not be sufficient in court to just yell, "Objection! Fallacious appeal to authority." Rather, in court, it is the responsibility of opposing attorneys to either provide their own expert witness, or by some means try to discredit the opposite side's expert witness. So, bottom line, the fundy atheist who throws out appeal to authority fallacy, and does no more than that, is just showing that they can't handle what you have to offer, and using that throw-out line as a way to avoid engaging the actual argument or fact presented. That's all for now. Until next time, this is J.P. Holden. See ya. We get next to the part where he whines about executions, and in spite of his unskilled attempt at sarcasm, he actually got it right. Yes, Messianic moron, you are a snowflake. One that would have melted within 10 seconds living anywhere in the world in 1400 BC, not just Judea. The key here is whether he actually has any answer to the problem of difficult social conditions beyond some idiocy like, God should have plopped a Safeway supermarket down in the middle of the desert and given them birth control. Well, I sure called that one spot on, didn't I? Stay tuned for the Messianic moron asking God to change his TV channels for him and wipe his rear end for him while he's on the toilet.
It's a wild, wild world. It's a wild, wild world. It's a wild, wild world. God will do all you want to hear. Want to live in a world where you never have to do anything you don't want to do? Here in Wild Wild World, all you have to do is point out that God is omnipotent, and he'll do stuff for you no matter how ridiculous.
That holding apologist was saying that the Gospels couldn't be any longer than a certain length because in ancient times paper was so scarce and expensive. Well, duh! You'd think an omnipotent God could just make more paper for them. Sheesh!
The Exodus? That was a big waste of time. Why not just zap the whole kit and caboodle over to the promised land where God wanted them and save all the time and trouble?
That story about Elisha being insulted because he was bald is ridiculous. Instead of punishing those poor kids, why didn't God just make more hair grow on Elisha's head so they couldn't make fun of him anymore?
If God's omnipotent and omniscient, I'm sure he knows I need help finding a girlfriend. So if he'll do that, I'll be happy to believe in him.
You know, I sure do hate cleaning the toilet. God's omnipotent, why can't he do it for me?
It's a wild, wild world. It's a wild, wild world. It's a wild, wild world. God will do all you want to hear.
Amazingly, he thinks that this is an answer in his favor when it's just the opposite. Yes, precisely. Overpopulation was a problem they did not have. and that was the result of tough laws to warn them of the serious consequences of wanton sexual behavior. In case you don't get it, by the way, the Kozul didn't have a problem with overpopulation either. The law they made was also promulgated precisely in order to prevent the problem before it happened. And that's also why abortion wouldn't be an option except for the grossly irresponsible. Typical of a child, Messi Moronic wanted others to pay for his selfish mistakes so that he can keep whipping out of his pants at his own leisure. Seen that before? Yeah, we sure have.
It's Wild Wild World. It's Wild Wild World. It's Wild Wild World. God will cover your butt here.
Are you finding rules and responsibility hard to live up to? Here in Wild Wild World, you don't have that problem, because God makes it easy for you to be responsible, because He does all the work for you.
Hey, God has this law in the Old Testament that means you can't eat lobster. That's pretty stupid, you know? I mean, if He's omniscient and omnipotent, He would have known how hard it would be to resist eating something this tasty and attractive to the eye, man. Why didn't He just make lobster ugly and yucky if He didn't want us to eat it instead of making us open to get punished because we did it? Yeah, Jesus said if you look on a woman lustfully, that's adultery. So, why didn't He make it so that when you look at a hot chick like that one, she instantly turns all ugly? Got it. Oh, man.
Son, you were pulled over for driving carelessly. And now, according to this test, you have a blood alcohol level 3 times over the legal limit. What do you have to say for yourself?
Hey, officer man, if y'all didn't want people to drive drunk, why don't you just shut down all the booze factories? I mean, you already know people are gonna get drunk and then get in their cars, right?
Hey kid, if you didn't want to come here and get beat up, you shouldn't have been driving drunk. 'Cause you knew you might get caught and go to jail, right?
It's Wild Wild World. It's Wild Wild World. It's Wild Wild World. God will cover your butt here.
Now this. Yeah, this one would count as a dumb question of the month if we still had that feature. Sure, when an idiot in your family acts like a selfish jerk, that never causes any problems. The moron must be the selfish jerk in his own family unit. I had to get a real laugh out of this one because it just proves my point that Loser Boy is nothing but a fundamentalist. Guess what? That phrase is also used by a bunch of fundamentalist morons called the Quiverful movement. They use it as an excuse to irresponsibly procreate. And like the Messianic moron, they're too stupid to read it properly as an exhortation rather than as an excuse to reproduce limitlessly. Kind of ironic. I've been calling him a fundy atheist, and he yet again proved that's exactly what he is. A fundamentalist in atheist clothing, with the same exegetical mentality as Christianity's most ignorant and least socially conscious citizens. What's that? Oh yeah, I heard a couple of his drones making the usual whine about there being no such thing as a fundy atheist. Clue into this, you dipsticks. Hey folks, this vid is here to answer questions about a phrase I frequently use, fundy atheist. A couple of people have objected that that sounds like an oxymoron. They'd be right if the connotation were strictly religious, but it's not. To begin, let's offer some history. We need to go back in time on my website here.
Not this far back.
Ah, yes. Now, some years ago, I was first introduced to the term fundy atheist. One of my readers had put together a small list entitled, "You Might Be a Fundy Atheist If," after the Jeff Foxworthy redneck gag. I took on that list and invited readers to contribute. Here are some of the funnier ones we had. Now, those will give you some idea what I mean by fundy atheist, but let's get something straight. I didn't make this phrase up, nor did my Christian reader for that matter. In fact, here's some interesting data on some of the earliest uses I could find. So, in light of all this, what is a fundy atheist? By now it should be clear that it is an atheist who acts in some way like a fundamentalist Christian. And not so coincidentally, that's what many of them used to be. There are a few defining characteristics we could talk about, but there's one in particular that stands out and causes me to use the term most. Let's put these two guys side by side to compare. Hey guys, what do you think of the Bible?
The Bible? I take the Bible seriously. When it says something, I assume it means what it says.
Yeah, notice something? They said exactly the same thing. In this case, the defining characteristic is that they both assume the Bible is best interpreted in a very strict literal fashion. No subtleties to grasp at, little or no symbolism to figure out, no layers or texture of meaning whatsoever.
Hey, now wait a minute.
Shut up. Let's look at an example of the kind of diseased thinking this sort of mentality produces. Take this verse from Exodus. Now, some commentators have proposed that when this text refers to blood, it's not meant to be so much literal as descriptive. In other words, because it looked like blood, smelled like blood in some way, the word blood was chosen to describe it. And in turn, some commentators say it was what we call some sort of red tide. Now, I'm not going to weigh in on which side is right in that debate, but I do want to point out the kind of goofball reasoning a fundy atheist will use in these situations.
What do you mean red tide? Come on, the Bible says it's blood. Take the Bible seriously. When it says blood, it means blood. Sheesh.
Yeah, that's how goofy they get. Here's the thing, though. Every object could be said to have certain levels of observational properties. Some are way more accessible than others. Using blood as an example, we can list a number of the most obvious observational properties, the sort of thing anyone with 5 senses can detect. For example, that it's red. You don't need any special talents to see that. You don't need a microscope, and you don't need a team of phlebotomists. On the other hand, blood also has many less accessible properties, things you would need a microscope or a team of phlebotomists to discover, or at least a book written by someone whose knowledge goes back to that kind of discovery. For example, that it contains hemoglobin. Now, of course, when we define blood, the semantic range of the word is inclusive of properties that are both obvious and obscure. But in the time of the Bible, that just couldn't be true. There's just no way that semantic range of the Hebrew word we translate blood could include such properties as includes hemoglobin. So, despite what these guys say, they're not taking the Bible the least bit seriously, because what they fail to do is try to understand it as the people who first wrote and read it did. Instead, they impose their own meaning and understanding. Now, one other thing before we finish. These guys might shoot back with any number of wacky excuses to preserve their views. For example, they might say that my take on this verse in Exodus can't be true because God, being omniscient, looked into the future and would have known that people might get confused by the use of the word blood. Then they'll point to 1 Corinthians 14:33. Well, that's wacky for a couple of reasons. One is that Paul's statement is made in reference to a situation in Corinth in which people were interrupting each other in meetings, not matters of difference of opinion on how to interpret a Bible verse. Second, under the circumstances I'm describing, God isn't the one authoring the confusion. These guys are. In that respect, it's, again, kind of funny, because the fundy atheist professes to have abandoned authoritarian religion. In reality, they're still stuck in that same mindset. So, there you go. Now you know why and how I use the term fundy atheist, and why I think both of them are, See you next time. In closing, here's my answer to this. The answer is, you are an idiot who has no right to bawl about uncritically adopting the hermeneutic of someone with far more education in these matters than you have. You also don't have the brains to engage them critically. In this debate, you're like the 9/11 truther who's debating a structural engineer on why the World Trade Center towers fell, and claiming that you're critically engaging the issue by arguing that they were explosives placed in the building before the planes crashed. The actual solution is for you to do some homework, read scholarly literature, become informed, and stop being a bigot. But I don't look for that to happen with the Moron or any of his followers. The fact that his rabid followers had more to say about comments here being disabled than anything else speaks to the babyish nature of their mentality. All they care about is themselves. And that's what always lies at the heart of fundy atheist arguments like these in the end. See you next time.